The most significant change in 3ds Max 2018 is the introduction of the Arnold renderer, which was independently developed by a company called Solid Angle. Solid Angle has been acquired by Autodesk, and Arnold is now the high-end production renderer in 3ds Max and other Autodesk packages. The Mental Ray renderer is no longer included with 3ds Max, but it is available from NVIDIA. Let's talk about Arnold. Max 2A is the Arnold plugin for 3ds Max, and it's developed and updated separately from the 3ds Max base package. This means that new features and bug fixes can be added at any time. For that reason, I strongly recommend that you go to solidangle.com and register so that you can keep up to date with the latest version of the Arnold plugin. Arnold is still in development. It's relatively mature, but there are a couple of features that are still in the works. Later in the course, we'll look at the key features of Arnold. But before we even get to that point, we should set some key render settings, which will affect performance and also the availability of maps in the material editor. In 3ds Max, let's open up the render setup window from the main toolbar, and that of course is a teapot with a gear. In the render setup window, let's change the production rendering mode to Arnold. It's currently scanline renderer. From that pull-down list, I'll choose Arnold. Let's go now to the Arnold Renderer tab. We'll come back to this later, but this is where we set up the quality of various components of the rendering. At the moment, we're concerned with the System tab, so let's go over there. And in the System tab, very importantly, we want to enable Legacy 3ds Max map support. This switch is disabled by default, and it really needs to be enabled if you are to use any of the maps that ship with 3ds Max. Turn that on, and we get a little warning here that says this option only works in Max 2A and is not supported in exported Arnold scene source files. Remember that Max 2A is the 3ds Max Arnold plugin, and it allows us to render in Arnold from the 3ds Max interface. If you wanted to render with the command line using Solid Angle's utility known as Kick, then you could export your scene from 3ds Max to a special scene format called the Arnold Scene Source, or .ass. And under those conditions, using ASS and Kick, you would not be able to render any of the 3ds Max procedural maps. Even if this switch were on, they still would not render in Kick. Okay, well, if you're just rendering from the 3ds Max user interface, then you don't care about Arnold scene source files, you don't care about Kick, and you want this switch to be on so you can access your maps. Down below that, we see threads, and this is very important for performance. By default, Arnold will detect how many threads can run on your computer. If you've got 8 virtual cores, for example, then Arnold will use 8 threads. And it's possibly going to use 100% of your available CPU resources. You can turn off Auto Detect if you like, and manually specify the number of threads or cores to be used. But even more useful than that, we can set this threads value to a negative number, and then Arnold will use the available number of cores minus that number. I've got 8 cores, so I'll set the number of threads down to -1. And now Arnold will use 8 minus 1 cores. These settings are stored in the scene file and not with your system preferences. I recommend, therefore, if you want these settings to be sticky and have the same settings each time you start a new scene, then save out a maxstart.max file. After making all of the adjustments to settings, then I can save out this scene as the new default. Just go to the File menu and choose Save As, and in the Current Project Scenes folder, simply save a file called maxstart. And now that scene will load every time you reset or create a new file. That's how to configure Arnold for performance, and also how to enable 3ds Max procedural maps for rendering with the Arnold plugin.